of this year, a conference room in a law firm on the 34th floor of a tower in downtown Los Angeles. A long table of dark wood. On the table, one thing. A small square of aluminum, dull, with a slightly melted edge. The last piece of metal my father ever cut in his shop in San Jose in 1998, a month before he closed the doors for good. Beside it, a closed binder. In the next room, a man from the Department of Justice Civil Division reads a number to a row of reporters. $541,800,000. The largest customs fraud and anti-dumping evasion settlement in the history of the United States. Hartwell Crane Aluminum Distribution Incorporated, dissolved. Its president, Desmond Mostyn Ferraro, convicted in the federal court for the Central District of California, 30 to 37 months in custody and $14 million in forfeiture. The chairman of the company, Bradford Hartwell Crane, admitted nothing and kept his title. And the man in Guangzhou who designed the pallets is still sitting at his desk because China does not extradite. 2 million aluminum pallets passed through American customs over 15 years. Not one of them was ever bought by anyone. They could not be bought. There was no pallet market. They were built for one purpose: to walk cheap Chinese aluminum into this country without the duty. The same cheap aluminum that, 20 years before that, had already killed my father's shop. I was a customs broker at that company for 15 years. I watched it happen. I was 37 the year my father died, and the year I first wrote it down. I was 52 the year they finally answered. The entry summaries knew everything from the beginning. My name is Carol Ann Liang Hewson. I am Taiwanese. I am American. My father told me, on the floor of his shop, that aluminum does not lie, the scale does. Let me tell you how, for 15 years, the scale lied. Let me take you back to before any of it. San Jose, 1983. A small industrial unit on Charcot Avenue, one of a row of tilt-up concrete boxes with roll-up doors, the kind of street where a man could rent a shop for very little and try to make a living out of metal. My father, Liang Wei-Ming, had a sign painted on the glass of the office door. Liang Family Aluminum. He cut it, bent it, welded it, drilled it. Railings, ladders, brackets, small structural parts for the light industrial shops that were filling the South Bay in those years, when Silicon Valley was still mostly low buildings and parking lots and men in work shirts. I was 9 years old. My name then was Liang Kai-ning. We had come from Taipei in 1981 when I was 7, part of a wave of Taiwanese trade and engineering families who landed in the South Bay in those years. My father had been a metalsman in Taiwan, and he was a metalsman here. The language was different. The metal was the same. On Saturdays, he brought me to the shop. He put me on a stool by the bench so I would not get near the saw, and he let me watch. The thing I remember most is the scale. A big platform scale near the receiving door, a beam balance with a brass slider on a long arm. When stock came in, my father weighed it. When a customer ordered a run, he weighed what went out. He wrote the numbers in a hardbound ledger in his small, careful hand, a column for what he bought, a column for what he sold, the difference between them his whole living. One Saturday, a delivery driver tried something. He set the bundle of bar stock on the scale at an angle, one corner riding the lip of the platform, so the beam read light. My father saw it in 1 second. He squared the bundle on the platform with 2 fingers, watched the beam settle, and read the true weight. He paid for the true weight, not the light one. Then he turned to me, and he said it. He said, in Mandarin, Lu Bu Hui Shuo Huang, Cheng Hui. Aluminum does not lie, the scale does. The metal is exactly what it is, Kai-ning. It weighs exactly what it weighs. Only a dishonest scale, or a man who tilts the bundle, makes the metal seem to lie. I did not understand it as a rule about honesty. I understood it as a rule about metal. The metal is the metal. You cannot argue with a pound of aluminum. You can only argue with the number someone writes down next to it. That is the whole of it. I have spent my life on the second half of that sentence. Now go forward. 2011. I am 37. I have been a customs professional for 27 years by then, 18 of them at a third-party logistics and brokerage house down in Long Beach, working entries through the busiest container port in the country. I hold a licensed customs broker credential. I earned it in 2001. I hold the Certified Customs Specialist designation. I have anglicized my name, Carol Ann, on naturalization, and I carry my husband's name with my own, Liang, from our marriage in 2004. I know the harmonized tariff schedule the way other people know a city they grew up in. I can tell you what chapter a thing belongs in by holding it in my hand. In 2011, I took a new job. Senior Director of Import Compliance at Hartwell Crane Aluminum Distribution Incorporated, a regional aluminum products distributor with its headquarters out in City of Industry, warehouses in Rancho Cucamonga and Ontario and Fontana, around $600 million a year in revenue, around 340 employees. It was a step up. Title, signing authority, a team, a real seat in a real company. I have a husband, Gregory, a structural engineer, a good and patient man. I have a daughter, Megan, who is small then, and who will choose mechanical engineering because of her grandfather. I have a son, Tyler, younger still. I have my mother, Su Mei Hua, who came with us from Taipei and who is still strong then. And in that same year, 2011, my father died. Pulmonary fibrosis, the doctor said. Decades of metal shop dust in his lungs. He had not owned a shop since 1998. He had spent the last 13 years of his working life on a wage at a larger metals distributor, a man who used to own his own scale, taking orders behind someone else's counter. He died at O'Connor Hospital in San Jose, and we buried him at Oak Hill Memorial Park, Section L. I was 37. I had taken the Hartwell Crane job partly to be in the aluminum business my father had loved. I am honest about that. And when he died, in the first months of that job, I had a choice in front of me that I did not even fully see at the time. I could grieve him and move on, or I could stay inside the very industry that had broken him and watch it from the inside. I stayed. Not out of anything dramatic, out of the simple feeling that the only answer that meant anything to what had destroyed my father's shop was to understand it from the inside, completely, and one day to be able to say exactly what it was. After the funeral, I cleaned out a corner of the detached garage of our ranch house in Roland Heights, a low brown house from 1978 on Pinto Mesa Drive. We had bought it in 2006. The garage became mine. A steel Craftsman rolling toolbox on the workbench, metal shelving above, my father's old bench vise, the one I had saved when his shop closed in '98, bolted to the bench where it had been bolted to his. The garage smelled of aluminum and machine oil, the way his shop had smelled, and on the bench, one small square of aluminum, the tile, the last honest pound of metal he ever cut. I had kept it for 13 years already. I did not yet know what it was for. I knew only that I would not throw it away. That is where it starts. A scale in San Jose, a sentence in Mandarin, a dead man, a tile on a bench, and a new job at a company that imported aluminum from China. I want to explain something because the whole story turns on it, and most people have never had a reason to think about it. When a company brings goods into the United States, it files a form with Customs and Border Protection. The entry summary, CBP Form 7501. On that form, you declare what the thing is, where it came from, and a code. The code is from the Harmonized Tariff Schedule, 10 digits, and that code decides the duty. Two things that look almost the same can carry wildly different duties because the code, not the appearance, decides. The entry summary is not a shipping label. It is a sworn statement to the government of the United States about what crossed the border and what is owed. A customs broker who signs it is signing a statement under penalty. That is what I do for a living. I make the sworn statement true. Now, there is a special kind of duty called an anti-dumping and countervailing duty. When a foreign country floods our market with a product sold below fair value, propped up by foreign subsidies, the Commerce Department can issue an order that puts a heavy extra duty on that specific product to level the field. Chinese aluminum extrusions, the long shapes you push molten aluminum through a die to make, bars and tubes and channels and angles, have carried such orders for years. The orders have numbers, a 579.67 on the anti-dumping side and C579.68 on the countervailing side. Those orders exist because the dumping was real and because it had already gutted American aluminum fabricators across the 1990s. People like my father. So, here is the trick, and I want you to see how clean it is. Raw Chinese aluminum extrusion, classified honestly, falls under Chapter 76 of the tariff schedule in the headings for bars and tubes and profiles, and it carries those anti-dumping and countervailing duties. Heavy ones. But if you take that same raw extrusion and weld it, just a little, into something shaped like a finished article, you can argue it has become a different thing. A finished article of aluminum. And there is a tariff line, 7616.99.51, other articles of aluminum, that is not subject to the extrusion orders. Hartwell Crane took raw aluminum extrusion from China and spot-welded it. 6 little welds, 6 points of contact, just enough to hold a shape together. And the shape they chose was a shipping pallet, a flat platform of aluminum bars, the kind you would set a load on and move with a forklift. Then they declared it on the entry summary as a finished aluminum pallet, 7616.99.51. Not extrusion. Articles of aluminum. No anti-dumping duty. No countervailing duty. The metal walked in cheap. I saw it in my first quarter. I was reconciling entries, which is the heart of my job, matching the code on the form against the actual merchandise against the question of which orders applied. And I kept hitting these pallets. Thousands of aluminum pallets coming in from a single Chinese supplier, the Nanhai Yuan Long Aluminum Group out of Guangdong. Declared as finished articles. Built, as far as the metal was concerned, out of exactly the extrusion that the orders covered. I went looking for the sales. Because a company that imports 2 million pallets is in the pallet business, and the pallet business means purchase orders, customers, shipments out, money coming back. I pulled the sales records. There were none. Not few, none. From 2011 through 2014, in the years I could see clearly, not one of those pallets had been sold to a single customer. There was no purchase order for a pallet. There was no shipment of a pallet to a buyer. There was no pallet market at all. The pallets came in by the container load and went to the 4 warehouses, City of Industry, Rancho Cucamonga, Ontario, Fontana, and they sat. They aged. Dust settled on them. The warehouse aging reports showed inventory that never moved. Racks of aluminum pallets stacked to the ceiling with a sales velocity of 0. A pallet that no one ever buys is not a pallet. It is a costume. The aluminum had put on a costume to walk past the duty, and once it was through the door, it took the costume off and stood in a warehouse as what it had always been, dumped extrusion. That was the whole scheme. Weld it just enough to call it finished, declare it as finished, escape the order, and never sell a single one, because selling was never the point. Importing was the point. I want to tell you how the company got here, because the scheme did not appear out of nowhere. Hartwell Crane was an old name in California aluminum. It was founded in 1971 by Crane Hartwell, a real fabricator and distributor of the old kind, who built a regional business selling honest American and Allied-sourced aluminum products to the construction and light industrial trade. His son Bradford inherited it. Bradford was a different animal. Corona Del Mar High School, then a business degree from USC, a man who thought of the company as a portfolio rather than a trade. And then the recession of 2008 came, and the margins on honestly sourced aluminum collapsed, and Bradford did what a portfolio man does. He went looking for cheaper. He found it in Guangdong. There was a sourcing trip in 2010, and out of it came the arrangement with the Nanhai Yuan Long Aluminum Group and the recruitment of Desmond Mostyn Ferraro, a man with the Guangdong relationships and the operational appetite to run the front. By 2011, the year I arrived, the pivot was complete. The company had stopped being a distributor of aluminum and become a doorway for it, a way for dumped Chinese extrusion to enter the country wearing a costume, with 4 warehouse affiliates standing ready to receive the metal that no one would ever buy. I walked into the middle of that, hired to be the compliance function of a company whose entire new business model was a compliance violation. They did not hire me to find the fraud. They hired me, I think, because a company that imports aluminum is supposed to have a senior director of import compliance, the way a building is supposed to have an exit sign. They did not expect me to actually read it. I opened a binder. 2011, my first one. 1 tab per quarter. On the left, the declared code. In the middle, the actual merchandise descriptor and the photographs of the 6 welds. On the right, the anti-dumping and countervailing order applicability and the duty that should have been paid. I called it my reconciliation series. I did not yet think of it as evidence. I thought of it as doing my job correctly, keeping the truth somewhere even when the form was lying. And I escalated. That is what you do. I wrote to the President and Chief Operating Officer, Desmond Mostyn Ferraro, and to the Chairman, Bradford Hartwell Crane, and I said plainly that the classification was wrong, that these were extrusions, subject to the orders, misdeclared as articles to avoid the duty. I expected a correction. You find an error, you raise it, the company fixes it. That is how I had been trained to think for 27 years. Mostyn Ferraro answered me himself. He was not angry. That is the thing about him I want you to hold on to. He was never angry. He was smooth and certain, and he had an answer ready. He said, "The pallets are technically pallets, Carol Ann. The welds are real welds. We have a written opinion from outside Customs Counsel that the classification is supportable. We are not going to relitigate it every quarter." And he closed the door on it. The next year, 2012, the opinion letter appeared. It came from a customs and trade lawyer named Prescott Langley Stoddard, a partner at a boutique firm down in Newport Beach. 4 pages on heavy letterhead. It said the spot-welded pallet classification under 7616.99.51 was supportable as articles of aluminum given the demonstrable structural welds. It did not mention that no pallet had ever been sold. It did not mention that the welds were designed to be the bare minimum, the structural integrity deliberately kept low to save aluminum cost. It read like a permission slip written by someone who had been told the answer first and asked to justify it second. I put the Langley Stoddard letter in my 2012 binder. I did not know yet how important it would become. I knew only that it was the kind of document a company keeps so that one day it can say it relied on advice of counsel. A letter like that is built to be a shield. I filed it where I could find it because a shield, examined closely, often turns out to be a confession. To understand why I stayed, you have to understand the shop. Not the metal trick, the shop. My father was born in 1944 in Taiwan, in the hard years. He learned metal young, the way men learn trades then, by standing next to someone older and being useful and being yelled at and slowly being trusted. When we came to San Jose in 1981, he was 37, the same age I would be the year he died, and he did what he knew. He saved, he borrowed a little, and in 1983, he signed a lease on the unit on Charcot Avenue and opened Liang Family Aluminum. For most of a decade, it worked. The South Bay was building everything. Light industrial shops needed railings and platforms and brackets, and a small fabricator who did clean work at a fair price and kept his word had customers. My father kept his word. He weighed honestly. He charged for the metal that left his shop and not a gram more, and he bought the metal that came in at the true weight and not a gram less, and the difference was his family's life. We were not rich. We were a metal shop family in a rented house, but it held. Then the 1990s came, and the price of aluminum coming out of China collapsed, and it did not collapse honestly. It collapsed because it was dumped, sold below the cost to make it, propped up by a government on the other side of the Pacific that wanted the market more than it wanted the margin. American fabricators could not match it. My father tried. He cut his own prices to the bone. For a while he undercut. Then he could not undercut anymore because you cannot sell metal for less than you can buy metal, and the imported finished parts were coming in priced under what he paid for raw stock. The math stopped working. The honest scale could not save him because the lie was not in his scale. The lie was upstream, in a price that was not a real price. He held on into the late 90s on pride, and on a few loyal customers, and on not knowing how to be anything but a man with a shop. In 1998, he let go. I remember the equipment auction tags, little numbered cards tied to the saw and the brake and the welder, the tools he had bought one by one over 15 years, sold off in an afternoon. I remember the empty unit, the oil stains on the concrete where the machines had stood, the silence in a place that had always had a saw running. And I remember the last run. He had one final job to finish before the doors closed, and when it was done, there was a remnant, a small square of aluminum left over, and he cut it clean and squared the edge and held it a moment and set it down. I asked him if he was going to throw it out. He said no. He said, "This one I keep." He did not explain. I took it home. I have had it ever since. The tile. After that, he took the wage job. He never owned a shop again. He never weighed his own stock again. And 13 years later, the dust he had breathed for 30 years finished the job the dumping had started, and he died. So when I stood in the warehouse at Hartwell Crane in 2011 and looked at racks of Chinese aluminum pretending to be pallets, dumped extrusion wearing a costume to dodge the very duties that existed because of what had happened to men like my father, I was not looking at an abstract customs violation. I was looking at the thing that killed his shop, and I could see, with my own trained eyes, that this time it had not even bothered to be legal. The dumping that ruined him in the 90s was at least, technically, just cheap. This was fraud. The same flood, the same metal, the same harm, but now with a falsified form on top of it. A sworn statement to my country that was a lie. There is a hard piece of this I have to put down plainly, because if I do not, someone will misunderstand it. The principal of the Chinese group that designed these pallets is named Liang Zhonghua. Liang, the same surname I was born with. Liang Kai-ning. I want to be very clear about what that does and does not mean. It is a coincidence of an alphabet of family names 100 million people carry. We share a name. We do not share a country, and we do not share a conscience. He sat in Guangdong and built a way to walk dumped metal past the duty. My father sat in San Jose and was buried by that same dumped metal. The shared surname is not kinship. It is the bitterest kind of accident. I have only ever named it once, to myself, and I name it now to you, so that no one walks away from this thinking it is a story about a people. It is a story about a fraud, and the people it crushed were American fabricators of every background, and the public treasury of the United States owed money it never got. That is why I stayed. Not for the money. There was no money in my mind then. I stayed because I had a tile on a bench, and a sentence from a dead man, and a job that let me see, code against entry, every single year, exactly how the lie was built. I escalated for 3 years. 2011, 2012, 2013. Quietly, in writing, through channels, the way you are supposed to. I did not go to the press. I did not go to the government, not yet. I believed, the way a person believes who has spent her life inside institutions, that if you put the truth in front of the people responsible, in clear language, with the documents attached, the institution would eventually do the right thing. I believed the system would work. In 2014, the system gave me its answer. Monday, the 8th of September, 2014, 3:40 in the afternoon. The second-floor Human Resources office at the City of Industry headquarters. I was asked up there with no real agenda given. The Vice President of Human Resources, Janelle Okafor Whitlock, was waiting for me. She is a careful woman, decent, the kind of person who takes the human part of human resources seriously. She had a single sheet of paper in front of her, and she read me an 11-minute notice. Effective immediately, I was being moved. Out of Senior Director of Import Compliance, the role with sign-off authority over entry classifications, the role where my name went on the question of which code was correct, and into a newly created position, Strategic Trade Advisory Fellow. A title that sounds like an honor. A fellow? It sounds like a university, like distinction, like a man with gray hair who is consulted on hard questions. It was a windowless office on the warehouse mezzanine, next to the room where they ran the document scanner. A refurbished workstation, no signing authority, no entry classification sign-off, no team, no seat where decisions were made. I would advise. I would not sign. The pen was taken out of my hand, and I was given a nameplate. At 3:48, the chairman, Bradford Hartwell Crane, stopped by. He did that. He was a man who liked to deliver these moments himself, in a warm voice, because he genuinely believed he was being kind. He said, "Carol Ann, we value your caution." Genuinely. He said the word genuinely, and I think he meant it. But the business needs to move, and the advisory seat lets you advise without slowing the floor. That was the whole sentence. The advisory seat lets you advise without slowing the floor. I was the slowing of the floor. My caution, which is the entire point of a compliance function, had been renamed a drag on the business, and softened with the word genuinely, and walled up in a room beside a scanner. At 3:51, after the chairman left, Janelle said something to me privately, and I have never held it against her because it was true, and she said it as a kindness. She said, "Carol Ann, I need you to hear this from me. The alternative they were discussing this morning was not keeping you. This keeps you." She believed she was protecting me. She was protecting me in a narrow way. The choice on the table had been to remove me entirely, and she had argued for the seat that kept me in the building. She just did not know, and could not know, that the building was the trap. I said, "Janelle, I hear you. Thank you for telling me the truth." And I meant that too. I did not retaliate against her. I did not expose her good faith part in it later when I could have. She delivered a hard thing honestly, and there is a difference between the messenger and the message, and I have always known the difference. That night I drove home to Rowland Heights, and I went out to the garage, and I opened the 2014 binder, and I wrote one line at the front of it. The system failed. The title sounds like a promotion. Fellow. It is a mezzanine and a scanner room. I keep reconciling. And I did keep reconciling. That is the part I need you to understand about the next 12 years. They thought the mezzanine was a grave. They thought, once she cannot sign, she is finished. She is a worrier in a windowless room. But the work I had to do, advise the floor on trade matters, gave me a reason to see every entry. I could not stop the lie. But I could see all of it, every year, and I could write it down, code against entry, in a binder, on a metal shelf in a garage. They had not buried me. They had moved me to a better seat for watching. They just did not know it, and I did not tell them. What the 12 years actually felt like is the harder thing to describe, because there was no single dramatic moment in them. It was the slow texture of being made small in plain sight. The company built a story about me, and they told it to everyone. They said, "We kept Carol Ann on out of loyalty, even though she could never quite see the commercial picture." They said it to new executives, on their first week, so that I was introduced, already explained, already discounted. They said it, in effect, to the customs auditors in 2016, the careful one who never adjusted to the real world. At the annual sales meeting, the president would introduce the room, and when he got to me, sitting near the back, he would say, "And of course, our resident worrier, Carol Ann," and the room would laugh, politely, the small laugh that a room gives when it has been told who is safe to laugh at. I would smile. I learned to smile at it, because the worst thing I could have done, the thing that would have ended my access and my seat for watching, was to let them see that it landed. So I smiled, the resident worrier, year after year, and I went home, and I opened the binder, and I wrote down another year of entries that the resident worrier had been right about all along. There is a particular loneliness in being correct, and being laughed at for it at the same time, in the same building, by the same people, for 12 years. I do not recommend it. But I will say this for it. It taught me patience that I did not have at 37. The Carol Ann who escalated 3 times in 3 years and expected the institution to fix itself was a younger woman who still believed loudness would be heard. The Carol Ann on the mezzanine learned that the only thing that could not be laughed at in the end was a number, and that numbers do not need you to raise your voice. They just need you to write them down, correctly, every year, until the year someone with the authority to act finally reads them. June 2016. Customs and Border Protection ran a regulatory audit of Hartwell Crane. You have to understand what that meant to me, sitting in my mezzanine room. For 2 years, I had been telling the company the classification was wrong, and the company had told me, in effect, that the government had not said so. And until the government said so, the company would keep its position and its opinion letter and its smooth certainty. And now the government was coming. Real auditors from CBP into our building, into our records. I let myself hope. I thought, finally, someone with a badge will pull a pallet off a rack, look at the 6 little welds, ask where the buyers are, and the whole costume will fall off in front of a federal officer. The audit ran its course, and it closed. No discrepancy found. I read those 3 words, and I felt something go cold in me that has never fully warmed back up. No discrepancy found. They had accepted the pallet classification at face value. They had taken the form as the truth of the thing. They had not done a physical inspection of the welds. They had not asked why 2 million pallets had a sales velocity of 0. They had not pulled the warehouse aging reports that would have shown the metal sitting and never moving. They looked at a sworn statement that said finished aluminum pallet, and they checked that the paperwork was internally consistent, and they went home. The scale lied, and the man sent to check the scale believed the scale. I have thought about that audit more than almost anything else in this story, because it is the moment that taught me the deepest thing I know about how these schemes survive. They do not survive by being hidden. The pallets were not hidden. They were stacked to the ceiling in plain sight. The scheme survived because the form is easier to read than the metal. A code on a page can be checked in an afternoon. The truth of 2 million pallets requires someone to walk the warehouse, lift the merchandise, count the buyers, and notice the absence of a market. And that is slow. And the floor needs to move, and the form said what it said. For the company, the audit was a gift beyond price. After June 2016, they had a new sentence. CBP looked at it and found nothing. They said it to new executives. They said it to industry peers. They would, in time, say it in effect to a federal prosecutor. The government audited us and cleared us. It became the proof that there was no problem, and it made me, the woman who would not stop reconciling in her windowless room, look like exactly what they wanted me to be. The eccentric. The worrier who could not let go of a question the professionals had already closed. I wrote in the 2016 binder, the system failed again. The audit accepted the form. No weld was lifted, no buyer was sought. The metal never moved, and no one asked why. I am the only person in this company who has ever looked at the actual aluminum and asked what it is. I was 42 years old. My father had been dead 5 years. I had been writing it down for 5 years, and the one institution I had counted on to come through the door and lift a pallet had come through the door and read a page. March 2019. I tried one more channel, the last clean one inside the building. The Ethics Hotline. Every company of any size has one. An anonymous line, a portal, a number, where an employee can report wrongdoing without giving a name, and the report is supposed to be reviewed independently and acted on. It is the institution's promise that the truth has a path, even when the chain of command is the problem. I had never used it. I had always gone in my own name, through channels, signed. But by 2019, the channels were closed to me, and the audit had cleared the company, and I was a fellow in a mezzanine, and I wanted to put it into the record in a way that did not depend on anyone liking me. I filed a report. I described the misclassification. I described the absence of any pallet market. I described, without naming the account because I was being careful, the existence of an internal design email from 2011 that laid out spot welding at 6 points to clear the pallet classification while minimizing structural integrity to reduce aluminum cost. The intent, in writing, in the company's own words, years before. I laid it out as cleanly as I could, anonymously, and I submitted it, and I waited. The ticket was logged, reviewed, and closed. No action warranted. That was the bottom. I want to be honest about where I was. 8 years. 3 failures of the system, the escalation buried in 2014, the audit that cleared them in 2016, and now the hotline closing the ticket in 2019. My father had been dead 8 years. I was 45, and for the first time, I almost stopped. I did not stop the reconciling, because by then, the reconciling was not a strategy, it was just who I was. A thing I did every year the way other people pray or run or garden. But I stopped doing anything active. I stopped escalating because there was nothing left to escalate to. I just kept the binders. I told myself it was a record for no one. A diary. The truth kept in a garage because the truth deserved to be kept somewhere, even if no one would ever read it. I was 45 years old, and I had been writing it down for 8 years, and I did not yet know what would ever make them answer, or whether anything would. My family carried me through those years without fully knowing what they were carrying. My daughter Megan was in high school then, already drawn to engineering, already asking her grandfather's old questions about how things are made and how they hold. My son Tyler was a child. My mother, Su Mei Hua, lived in the converted back bedroom, the way she had since my father died. And my husband, Gregory, who is a structural engineer and a man who notices loads and stresses, said the thing to me one night that I have never forgotten. He said, "You cannot carry this alone forever, Carol." He did not know the whole of it. He knew there was a weight. He had watched me go out to the garage in the dark for 8 years. He just said, quietly, "You cannot carry this alone forever." And he was right. But I did not yet have anywhere to set it down. The summer of 2022. A morning at the kitchen table in Rowland Heights, before the house woke up, a cup of tea going cold, my laptop open. I was running a routine landed cost reconciliation for the third quarter, the kind of dull spreadsheet I had run 100 times, because old habits do not die just because they have been walled into a mezzanine. Landed cost is the full cost of getting a thing to your door, the price, plus the freight, plus the duty, plus the fees, expressed for metal as cost per pound. And I saw a number. The landed cost on the pallets came to about $1.18 a pound. I sat very still, because that number is impossible. A finished, fully welded aluminum pallet, a real one, with the welding labor and the fabrication and the structure, lands somewhere between $2.40 and $3.10 a pound. That is what a finished article costs. $1.18 a pound is not a finished article. $1.18 a pound is raw extrusion, somewhere around $1.10 to $1.25 a pound, plus almost nothing. Plus, specifically, the duty that was never paid. The number was the confession. For 11 years, I had been writing down the structure of the lie, the code against the entry, the missing buyers, the 6 welds, the cleared audit. I had the shape of it. But the shape of a thing is an argument, and arguments can be answered, and they had answered mine for 11 years, with an opinion letter and a smooth voice and a cleared audit. The number was not an argument. The number was arithmetic. The cost per pound said, in a language no opinion letter can talk back to, that these were never finished pallets. They were raw extrusion that had walked in without its duty, and the price proved it, because the price was exactly what raw extrusion costs, and nothing like what a real pallet costs. The metal does not lie. The cost per pound is a kind of scale, and this scale, for once, was telling the truth, and the truth was $1.18. I went out to the garage that night, and I did not come back in until almost morning. I pulled down the binders, all 11 of them, 2011 through 2021, and the partial one for 2022, and I laid them open on the bench under the single work lamp, and I put the tile in my hand, and I did the thing I had never let myself do all the way through. I counted the whole scheme. 847 misclassified entries, around $1,020 million in total imports over the years, around $277 million in anti-dumping and countervailing duty that should have been paid to the United States and never was. $277 million. Owed to my country, not paid. Hidden behind 6 welds and a costume and an opinion letter and a cleared audit, for 11 years and counting. I sat in the garage with my father's vise bolted to the bench beside me, and the tile in my palm and 11 binders open under the lamp, and I understood what I had been doing for 11 years. I said it out loud, to no one. I said, "For 11 years, I thought I was keeping a diary. Tonight, I understand I have been building a case. A diary is for you. A case is for a court. The same pages, the same handwriting, the same code against the same entry. But the moment I had the number, the $18, the whole 11 years of paper turned over in my hands and became something else. It became evidence. And evidence is not kept in a garage. Evidence is filed. I want to tell you about a Tuesday morning, the 8th of March, 2022, 7:11 in the morning, the loading dock at the City of Industry headquarters. By the pallet rack, they numbered B14. The morning batch of entry summaries was being signed for the day. I had not slept much. I had the $18 in me, and I made a decision that I had not made in 3 years, since the hotline closed. I decided to say it out loud, to his face, in the building, one time, so that there would be a witness and a moment and a record that I had said it plainly to the man who signed his name to it. I wore a charcoal blazer and my licensed customs broker pin on the lapel, the way I did every working day. I carried 2 things. In one hand, a sample of the spot-welded pallet, one of the actual objects, the 6 little welds visible, the costume itself. In the other hand, a single sheet of paper, the printout of the Margin Anomaly. The $18. Desmond Mostyn Ferraro was at the dock with a clipboard, working through the morning entries. There was a dock supervisor near us, a man named Ruben Ostrowski Vega, mid-40s, a steady worker who had no idea he was about to be the only witness to anything. I walked up. I did not raise my voice. I had practiced being quiet. I said one sentence, audible to Ruben, and audible to Desmond, and to no one else. I said, "Desmond, there is no pallet market. There was never a pallet market, and you have been signing your name to it for 11 years. He paused for about 5 seconds. I counted them because I had braced for them. Then he set the clipboard down on the rack, very deliberately, and he said, not loudly, "Carol Ann, come with me." And he walked me up to the mezzanine, to my own advisory fellow office, the windowless room beside the scanner, and he closed the door behind us. 7:16 in the morning. I remember the time because I wrote it down within the hour. What he said in that room was what he had always said, and it is worth repeating because it is the whole philosophy of the thing. He said, "The pallets are technically pallets. The welds are real welds. We have a written opinion from counsel. Customs audited us and found nothing." He laid it out, calm, certain, the way a man lays out a position he has decided to believe so completely that the deciding has disappeared and only the belief is left. He did not deny the $18. He did not engage the $18 at all. He talked about welds and opinions and audits, the form, the costume, never the metal, never the cost per pound, never the buyers who did not exist. I realized in that room that he was never going to break, and that I had not come for him to break. I had come to end my own silence. I said, "All right, Desmond," and I left. And I went back down, and I sat in the mezzanine, and I opened the binder, and I wrote, "Confrontation Day. There is no pallet market. He knows. He will never say he knows. I am done waiting." That was the day the dormancy ended. 11 years of writing it down, and 1 sentence at a loading dock, and after that, I was no longer a woman keeping a record. I was a woman building toward a filing. I reached out, carefully, to outside counsel. To a firm I knew by reputation in this kind of work, lead counsel Ailstock, Witkin, Kreis, and Overholtz, out of Pensacola. I remember the first long call, sitting in my car in the garage, with the door down so the house could not hear, laying out 15 years of binders to a lawyer in 15 minutes, watching the silence on the other end of the line change from polite to alert to something close to hunger when I got to the $18 and the 0 sales velocity. Lawyers in this work hear a lot of people who are angry. They hear far fewer people who have reconciled 847 entries by hand. The difference is everything. And through that work, I found that I was not the only one. There was a co-relator, a man named Marcus Delgado Brenner, 58, who had owned a small aluminum products distributorship in Phoenix and had been driven nearly out of business by exactly this dumped pricing, the underpriced metal flooding in beneath what an honest distributor could buy at. We met in a small conference room in Phoenix on a hot afternoon. He brought his own records, years of invoices showing him losing bids to importers whose landed price was below his cost of goods, and he had never understood, until it was explained to him, that some of those importers were not just cheaper, they were cheating. He was tired in the way my father had been tired, a small operator who had spent years getting beaten by a price that was not a real price, and blaming himself for it, the way honest men do when the game is rigged and no one tells them. He said something I have kept. He said, "We were the small ones. Nobody listens to the small ones." And I said, "We are going to make them listen with the number. The number, the $18, the 277 million. That was the thing that could not be talked back to. And here is the part that still amazes me, looking back. The company did not know. They thought the Carol Ann problem was solved. They had solved it in 2014, in their minds, with the mezzanine and the fellow title. To them, I was the worrier who had been managed, the eccentric in the windowless room, kept on out of loyalty. Moston Ferraro kept signing the entries. The pallets kept coming. The whole machine ran on, smooth and certain, while the woman they had buried on the mezzanine sat with 11 binders and $18 and a phone number for a law firm in Pensacola, and started, quietly, to build the thing that would end them. December 2023. We filed. The complaint went in under seal in the United States District Court for the Central District of California. The legal theory has a name that took me a long time to fully love, because it is exactly right. Reverse false claim. Most of what people know about the False Claims Act, 31 United States Code 3729, is about cheating the government out of money it pays out, a contractor billing for work never done. But there is another kind. Subsection A1G, the reverse false claim. It is about knowingly concealing or avoiding an obligation to pay money to the United States. The duties. The $277 million Hartwell Crane owed and hid. They did not steal a payment from the government. They withheld a payment owed to the government behind a false form for 15 years. That is the reverse false claim, and a private citizen with the proof can file it on behalf of the United States and pursue it. That citizen is called a relator. That is the word for what I became. Under seal means it is secret. The complaint is filed, and the government gets time, quietly, to investigate and decide whether to step in, while the defendant does not even know a case exists. The Department of Justice Trade Fraud Task Force took it up, with the Commercial Litigation Branch, and I gave them everything. The 15 binders, the Reconciliation Series, 2011 through 2025, one per year, hand-tabbed. The Margin Anomaly spreadsheet, the $18. The 847 entry substitution table, every entry number, every date, the declared code against the correct code against the duty that should have been paid. The photographs of the 6 welds. The warehouse aging report proving 0 sales velocity, the decisive no market proof. The 2012 Langley Stoddard opinion letter, the shield that was a confession. The 2011 design email, Spot-Weld at 6 points to clear pallet classification, minimize structural integrity to reduce aluminum cost. The intent in their own words. The Piers and Panjiva public import records that tied Hartwell Crane's import volumes to the Nanhai Yuan Long Aluminum Group's export volumes. The merchandise flow proof linking the American front to the Chinese chain. And the tile. My father's tile, and the closure documents from 1998, the lease termination, the equipment auction receipt, the final invoice. The thing that connected the harm to the fraud. Under seal, the case sat for a long time, the way these cases do. And here is what almost no one understands about being a relator under seal. I could not tell anyone. Not the company, obviously, but also not my coworkers, not most of my family in any detail, no one. And I had to keep working. I went into the City of Industry building every day, into the mezzanine, and I did my advisory fellow job, and I reconciled the very same entries that were now exhibits in a sealed federal complaint with my name on it. And I said nothing, and I gave nothing away, and I watched Mostin Ferraro keep signing. I want you to sit with that for a second, because it is the strangest stretch of my life. Imagine going to the same windowless room every morning, past the same people who call you the resident worrier, and smiling at the same small laughs, while in a courthouse downtown, there is a sealed complaint with your name on it that, when it opens, will end the company and put the president in federal prison. Imagine being the most important person in the building and the most diminished person in the building at the exact same time, and being the only one who knows it. Gregory knew there was a case, in the broadest terms, because I could not carry it past him and stay married. And he is a structural engineer. He understands load-bearing things. But I could not give him the details, and he did not ask for them. He just made sure dinner was there, and the children were fine, and the garage light worked. And some nights, he would put a hand on my shoulder on the way past, the way my grandmother is said to have stood behind my grandfather, and say nothing, and that was enough. There is a strange thing that happens to the humiliation deliverer in a story like this. Janelle Okafor-Whitlock, the VP of Human Resources, who had read me the 11-minute notice in 2014, learned the truth in 2024 as the investigation widened and people began to be approached. She had delivered the burial in good faith. When she understood what she had been used to deliver and what had actually been going on behind it for all those years, she did not protect the company. She gave the Department of Justice a sworn declaration in 2024 and a deposition in 2025. The woman who had been handed the job of walling me up came across to the side of the truth the moment she was given a clear view of it. I had never blamed her. I was glad, in a quiet way, that she got to choose when she finally could see. The government did what the 2016 audit never did. This is the heart of it for me, professionally, the moment that vindicated 15 years of reconciling. Customs and Border Protection's Trade Remedy Law Enforcement Directorate, working with the Department of Justice, did the slow thing. The thing that is hard and takes people and takes time, and that no overworked audit had been willing to do. They walked the warehouse. They lifted the merchandise. They put the pallets under a covered merchandise analysis under the Enforce and Protect Act. They inspected the 6 welds, the actual physical welds, and saw them for what they were, the bare minimum to hold a shape, the structural integrity deliberately kept low to save aluminum, exactly as the 2011 email had described designing them. And they did the one thing that settles everything. They looked for the market. They pulled the warehouse aging records across the years, 2.2 million extrusions warehoused as pallets, and they found a sales velocity of 0. No buyers, no purchase orders, no market, ever. The decisive proof, the one I had been holding since my first quarter in 2011, confirmed by federal investigators with the authority to act on it. No market means it was never a pallet. It was never a finished article. It was raw extrusion in a costume, and the costume was a fraud on the duty. Once you have established that the merchandise was never what the form said, the rest follows. The criminal track activated. Desmond Mostin Ferraro was identified as the entry signer of all 847 entries, his electronic broker of record signature on every one of them, and as the source of the 2011 design email from his own account. The intent and the act, both, on the president and chief operating officer. The man who had told me, calmly, for 15 years, that the welds were real welds. And the Chinese chain. Through the Piers and Panjiva merchandise flow records, investigators tied it all to the Nanhai Yuan Long Aluminum Group and its principal, Liang Zhonghua, in Guangdong, the man who designed pallets that were never meant to be sold. He was named in the filings, and he was unreachable. China does not extradite. He stayed at his desk, on the other side of the Pacific, named and beyond the reach of any consequence the United States could deliver. That is the asymmetry I had understood from the beginning. The man who designed the fraud sits safe across an ocean. The American operator who signed the forms here would face an American court. And the man whose family name I happen to share would never share a single hour of what was coming to anyone else. 2025. My mother fell. Su Meihua was 78 by then, living where she had lived since my father died, in the converted back bedroom of the Roland Heights house. She fell in that room, and there was a brief hospitalization, a neutral hospital, nothing to do with any of this, just an old woman and a hard floor. The prognosis was fine, but there was a day at her bedside, while the seal was still on the case, and I still could not tell most people most of it, when she said a thing to me in Mandarin that I have carried since. She said, slowly, because she was tired, "Kai Ning, ni baba de hua," your father's words. And then she said the whole of it, in his language, the sentence from the shop floor. Lu bu hui shuo huang, cheng hui. Aluminum does not lie, the scale does. Ni ji de ma, do you remember it? And I said, Ma, wo ji de? Mother, I remember. Wo mei yi nian dou zai ji. I have written it down every year. She looked at me. She knew, in the way mothers know without being told the details, that I was in the middle of something heavy and long. And she asked me the only question that mattered to her, the one that cut straight through to the center of it. She said, "Na ge cheng," that scale. "Xianzai shuo zhenhua le ma?" Does it tell the truth now? I said, "Kuai le ma?" Soon, mother. "Kuai le, soon." She closed her eyes and rested. She recovered. She is alive. But that conversation at her bedside, with the seal still on and the answer still not delivered, was the moment in this whole thing that I think of when I think of what it cost to wait. I was 51 years old. The case was still sealed. My father was 14 years dead. And my mother, in the language we brought from Taipei, was asking me whether the scale my father lived by had finally started telling the truth. And all I could honestly say was, soon. Not yet. Soon. That is the price of doing it the long, correct way, through a sealed federal complaint and a slow government and a careful counsel. You do it right, and right takes years, and in those years, the people you love grow old, asking you a simple question you cannot yet answer with a yes. It ended the way the cold open began. The seal lifted. The Department of Justice announced it. $541,800,000. A civil settlement under the False Claims Act, the largest customs fraud and anti-dumping evasion recovery in the history of the United States. Hartwell Crane Aluminum Distribution Incorporated dissolved as an importing entity, a 5-year compliance monitorship over the wind down. The $277 million in evaded duties pursued separately in the Court of International Trade. Principal and interest, the actual money owed to my country, collected at last. Desmond Mostyn Ferraro, the president who signed the 847 entries, pleaded to a single conspiracy count. 30 to 37 months in federal custody, $14 million in forfeiture, 36 months of supervised release after. The man who told me the welds were real welds will spend years counting them in a federal facility. And the asymmetry held, exactly as I had always known it would. Bradford Hartwell Crane, the chairman, was never criminally indicted. He took an individual civil judgment under the False Claims Act with no admission of liability. He kept his title through the monitorship. He kept his membership at the Newport Harbor Yacht Club. He kept his seat on the Hoag Hospital Foundation board. The sincere conviction that this was aggressive tariff engineering and not fraud, the belief that he relied in good faith on a lawyer's letter, carried him over the line that his president did not cross. He believed it, I think, all the way down, and the believing protected him. The man who set the direction kept his life. The man who signed the forms lost his. And the man who designed the metal, Liang Zhonghua, across the Pacific, lost nothing at all, and is at his desk this morning, the same as any other morning. There was also reform, the kind that does not make headlines and matters more than the number. Customs and Border Protection put in a mandatory HTS reconciliation audit protocol for aluminum product importers. The discipline I had done alone in a mezzanine for 15 years, made into a rule for everyone. A new covered merchandise advisory on spot-weld evasion came out of the Trade Remedy Law Enforcement Directorate. I do a little part-time advisory work with them on the protocol now, quietly, with no name attached. The method is named for the method, not for me. That is the way I wanted it. I have never been in the news. I do not want to be. I had a choice about the money, and I want to tell you what I did with it, because it is the truest thing in this story. As the relator, by statute, I was owed a share of the recovery. My share came to around $43 million before costs, around $24 million after the contingency to counsel and the taxes, split with Marcus. $24 million. I did not keep it as a windfall. I put nearly all of it into a thing I named the Liang Wei-Ming Small Fabricator Trade Fairness Fund at San Jose State University's College of Engineering in partnership with the South Bay Taiwanese American Chamber of Commerce. 3 things it does. It gives trade remedy legal aid microgrants to small American metals fabricators harmed by dumped imports, the help my father never had. It funds a customs compliance ethics curriculum for the customs broker licensing track, so that the people who sign the sworn statements are taught what the statement means. And it pays for a small shop metal fabrication apprenticeship scholarship, so the craft does not die with the men who carried it. I kept a modest reserve for my mother's care and my children's education. That is all. The number was never mine to spend on myself. It was the answer to a question my father never got to ask out loud. Now let me tell you about 3 places. The first is a Saturday in spring, the year after the settlement, late afternoon, at Oak Hill Memorial Park in San Jose, Section L. My father's grave. Liang Wei-Ming, 1944 to 2011. I went alone. I had the tile in my hand, the last honest pound of metal he ever cut, and the closed final binder under my arm. I set the tile on the granite shoulder of the headstone, and I said the sentence aloud, in his language, the way he taught it to me on the shop floor when I was 9. Lu Bu Hui Shuo Huang, Cheng Hui. Aluminum does not lie, the scale does. And then I added my own ending to it, in English, the one I had been holding for 15 years to say in this exact place. I said, "The scale lied for 15 years, Ba. I weighed it myself. The number is true now." I stayed 7 minutes in the spring light. I did not weep at the grave. I wept in the car, after, where he could not see, the way I would have wanted to spare him. I drove the tile home that evening and put it back in the steel toolbox in the garage. The second place is the South Bay Taiwanese American Chamber of Commerce Community Hall in San Jose, some weeks later, a Sunday late morning. The first workshop of the fund. My mother was there, 78 and walking slowly, but walking. My daughter Megan, in mechanical engineering at UC Irvine. Marcus Delgado Brenner, who had reopened his Phoenix distributorship with his share. A room of small shop owners and customs broker students on folding chairs. I did not give a speech about myself. I taught the reconciliation method, code against entry, the thing my father did with a beam balance and I did with a spreadsheet. And I told one story about a shop on Charcot Avenue that could not buy stock at an honest price because the price upstream was a lie, and what that did to the man who ran it. My mother leaned over to Megan in the row of folding chairs and said in Mandarin, "Ni wai gong hui hen jiao ao." Your grandfather would be very proud. Megan was taking notes. The first time the craft and the compliance both passed down a generation in the same morning. Marcus shook my hand and said, "We were the small ones. Nobody listens to the small ones. You made them listen." The third place is the garage in Rowland Heights, the following winter, a weeknight. My husband Gregory and my son Tyler and I cleaning it out. I took the 15 binders down off the metal shelving and decided what to keep. I kept 3. The first one, 2011, the first flag. The 2022 one, the catalyst, the $1.18. And the last one, the final reconciliation. The rest I recycled. 15 years of paper, most of it back into the stream. and the tile I set into a small frame I made on the workbench beside my father's old bench vise, the vise I saved when his shop closed in 1998. Tyler, who is 16 and who has watched me keep a square of metal his whole life, asked me why I would keep a piece of scrap. And I told him. I said, "It is not scrap. It is the last honest pound of metal your grandfather ever cut. I kept it so I would not forget what the cheap stuff was for." Gregory, quietly from across the garage, said, "She kept one tile for 15 years and turned it into $500 million and a fund in his name. Remember that." The public radio was on, low, in the corner. The frame tile caught the work lamp. My father's vise was bolted to the bench where it has always been. The 3 binders sat on the shelf. Aluminum does not lie. The scale does. I was 37 the year my father died, and I first wrote it down. I was 52 the year they finally answered. I reconciled every code against every entry for 15 years. My name is Carol Ann Liang Hewson. I am a customs broker. I am Taiwanese. I am American. I kept one tile from my father's last run on the bench, so I would not forget what the cheap metal was for. That is what I am for.